Okay friends, one of the first things we need to do to get started on this job is to remove our radiator cap. You want to make sure that your radiator is nice and cool to the touch. You definitely don't want to open it while it's hot. There we are. Now what we're going to have to do is remove this unit from the vehicle itself. Go ahead and lift this up, and we'll carefully set this aside. Now that we have everything off of the fan shroud, we can continue on with our 4 mounting bolts. You're going to find 2 on each side of this. Let's go ahead and remove all 4. Now up along the front, you're going to find 3 mounting bolts. Let's go ahead and get those off of there. Let's grab onto this. Get it out of the way. Now the next thing we need to do is remove the fan clutch from this. To do that, it's going to be easiest with a tool that looks a lot like this. Essentially what I want to do with this is just get it on the nut side of this, which is the back side, and then I'm going to turn this counterclockwise to break it free. Alright, let's go ahead and spin this off of here. When you're removing your fan, you want to be very careful not to let it drop down and damage your radiator cooling fins here. If it comes down and peens these over, you're going to have a restriction of airflow, which could cause an overheating condition if it's bad enough. We can grab onto this, get this out of the way. It's supposed to have 2 bottom bolts. The petcock to drain your coolant is going to be on the driver's side, lower aspect of the radiator. Go ahead and carefully grab onto that with some pliers, and then go ahead and loosen it up. When you do this, it's important to make sure that you have a coolant bucket underneath there, something that you can safely recycle the fluid with. Let's let that drain out. Now before we continue on to removing our serpentine belt, we want to start off by loosening all 4 of these bolts. That way they're the pulleys still holding still for us. Now it's a good idea to pay attention to your serpentine belt routing. Pay attention to which direction it goes over all of your pulleys. You can even draw it if you needed to. After that, we're going to come right here to our serpentine belt tensioner with our 3/8 ratchet, relieve tension, and then remove our belt. Inspect your belt. If it needs to be replaced, now's the time. Let's get these off of here. Now let's remove our idler pulley. Let's just come back over here. We're going to go ahead and snug this up. Now we're just going to spray down the general area where the water pump meets onto the engine. We want to try to get off any dirt and debris that might be in that localized area. You're going to see that you have 2 hoses up along the top of your water pump, and then you're going to have 1 located down at the bottom. That's your lower radiator hose, and it leads to the radiator. Let's go ahead and remove all of these clamps and then move along. Once all the clamps are nice and loose, let's continue on with a pick that looks like this. We're going to try to get in between here so we can break the hoses free from the tubes without damaging the hoses, and then we'll go ahead and move along. So we moved our bucket underneath this localized area because this is where the next mess is going to be coming from. We can start removing the hoses. With the lower radiator hose off the water pump and these 2 hoses broken free completely, we're going to move along to our 4 mounting bolts. You're going to find that there's 2 mounting bolts located on the driver's side of the water pump, and then 2 more located on the other side of the water pump in pretty much the same area. Go ahead and remove all 4. Just keep in mind that there isn't anything else holding the water pump in. Something to pay attention to as you remove your bolts is you might happen to notice coolant comes pouring out once they're removed. That's because the threads actually go into the coolant jacket area. So when you go to put in your new bolts, or even your old bolts if you had to, I guess, you would want to make sure you put on a nice sealant on the threaded area. There it is, friends. Now that the water pump's out of the way, let's continue on with a nice flat-bladed scraper here. We're going to scrape down the area on the engine where the water pump gaskets are going to ride. We want to make sure that we have a nice smooth surface so we can have perfect mating contact. So now that we have these areas nice and cleaned up, I always like to take a quick look at the holes themselves. What you're going to notice if you were to take something like this, stick it in, this one kind of just stops right about there. Check this one. And that one just keeps going, going, going. So like I said, that one leads in to where the coolant's going to be housed, so you need to absolutely make sure that you have some sort of sealant on your mounting bolts. These ones over here, I tested them, they both stop, so you don't necessarily have to worry about it, but it only really makes sense to just do them all. Other than that, a reason why I test them first is because I like to blow out the holes to make sure there's no remaining fluid inside of them, but the one that does actually have the coolant on the backside there, it's going to be a little hard to get the stuff out of there. Alright, so now we've got our water pump, our 4 bolts with, of course, the thread sealant on them, and then, of course, we have our 2 gaskets. The gaskets are going to go in between the water pump and the engine itself. When you go to put the gaskets on there, you want to make sure you have them facing in this direction. You don't want to have it facing like that. This little extra area right here should be facing down. Now let's do a quick inspection of our hoses. Make sure you don't see any dry cracks. That looks good. Check them all. Let's go ahead and put our clamps right onto our water pump here. Put both of our hoses on here. Now at this point, to get the gaskets on here, it's going to be easiest to start with the driver's side. So I'm just going to go ahead and slide that in right here. Get my bolt through the upper aspect of that gasket so it's sitting in there. And now I'll try to line this up with the engine. We'll start in this upper bolt, line up the lower bolt hole, and then we'll do all the rest. Once you're 100% sure that your gaskets are lined up properly, go ahead and snug up all 4 of your bolts and then torque them to 33 foot-pounds. Let's go ahead and put our lower hose on here. Make sure it's bottomed out as far up as it can go and as evenly as possible. After that, go ahead and put your clamp on here, snug it up, move along, and tighten up all of your other clamps. If you're using an electric bit driver, make sure that you just double check to make sure they're snug with a 1/4-inch ratchet. Now it's time to get our pulley back on here. Let's go ahead and start all 4 of our bolts and then we'll snug them up and torque them to 18 foot-pounds. It's a good idea to use a little bit of thread locker on these bolts. Let's just torque these to 18 foot-pounds. I like to keep that rubber on there, it keeps the threads protected. Now let's just give this a quick spin to make sure it's sitting completely level. Now it's time to get the idler pulley back in here. In case yours happen to come completely apart, you've got your bolt, then the washer goes through the idler pulley. Then you have your adapter with a little ridge. That ridge is going to go up and inside the idler pulley. Then this is going to go directly against your engine. Now let's torque this to 37 foot-pounds. Now that we have the belt completely on here, you just want to inspect it to make sure it's going around all the pulleys completely. If it seems as though it's sitting off to one side, you're more than likely going to damage your belt. Now we just want to double check to make sure that our petcock is 100% closed. This looks great. Now for ours personally, we had those 2 bolts that were missing down along the bottom, so I'm not necessarily going to worry about those, but of course you would want to start them in. Now it's going to be time to get this fan clutch on here. Line it up. Turn it clockwise. All right, we've got this started. Let's go ahead and bottom it out and then we'll snug it up. Now let's get this upper shroud in there. Line this up with its mounting holes. Now let's just go ahead and put in our 3 bolts that come across the top here and then the 2 that go on each side of this. Give your fan a quick spin, make sure it's not hitting up against anything. At this point, let's continue on to putting our wiring back across here and we'll mount it back in so it's nice and secured. So now the next thing that you want to do is go ahead and fill up your cooling system. It's going to be easiest with a funnel buddy that looks like this. Essentially, you want to just go ahead and fill it up with the Dexcool coolant, or of course you can use some kind of long life coolant as long as it says that you can mix it with any type of coolant such as Dexcool. Go ahead and put your radiator cap back on there and then take it for a road test.